Thanks for having me. The goal of the title of this program is not to scare everyone, but just to indicate blind spots that may be around backgrounds and answer some questions around some common things that come up with our clients and the different people we work with in the area of background screening, specifically around employment stuff. So let me get started. Obviously, I'll share scenarios and answer any questions, but obviously, just a disclaimer, obviously check with your employment counsel. Not Augie, but Ron. So I'm going to cover in this presentation kind of these areas: the process, the rules, the searches, and kind of landscape specifically here in California. Stop me at any time if you have any questions or if there's anything that's not clear. It is becoming more and more complicated, and the goal here is not to overcomplicate things, but just indicate, again, things that can be done to avoid creating additional risk. The whole purpose and passion of our business is to help clients mitigate risk in their business by helping them make good decisions around hiring. And there's no reason to introduce additional risk by doing things improperly. So it always makes sense to do it correctly. And Nicole, who's here on my team, helps our clients to really put together background screening packages to do that and answer any questions. And we really work hard on the compliance and legal end of it by working with counsel to make sure that we're not creating any unneeded risk. So here in California, and if you're compliant here in California, you're going to be compliant in most places. But so this process that I'm going to talk about really stems from compliance here. So conditional offer before you're doing the background, you're going to want to have authorizations and disclosures, and then you are going to eventually you're going to have a report that's generated, and then if there's any kind of adverse action to be taken, you're going to go from there. Here in California, doing the background before conditional offer is just not the right way to go about it. You want to make sure those authorizations and disclosures are updated and complete, because when you're talking about litigation, these are the areas kind of where the litigation is going to stem its big head, and the big guys are getting sued for improper authorizations and disclosures, not about what's in the report or not in the report or whatever else. So, and doing that electronically and quickly, either via text or email, is super important. Making sure that dynamic and prompting based on where the person is, the position, and all these different other nuances that lawyers all over the place have to come up with. So this is kind of the process and what it looks like. And again, 90% of the time, it's probably nothing to review. It's when there are actionable cases and things to be reviewed where the pre-adverse and adverse action process is in there. And I won't get into the details of that, but there's a regulated way of going about addressing what's in the report, allowing the applicant to contest what's in there, reinvestigate, and then come up with a final decision if that's withdrawing an offer or in hiring the person. The rules. California here, we're a 7-year convictions only state. So what does that mean? Saji, what does that mean? Oh,
Some convictions only reportable. Well, it means beyond 7 years not reportable.
Right. Kind of. So the disposition of the murder case
sounds like an attorney answer.
Is 7 years ago. More than 7 years ago, it's technically not reportable on the background check. However, there could be incarceration, parole, and other things that extend that disposition date. So if it's a serious crime where there's time served, it can make that rule a little bit longer. But for the most part, if somebody murdered somebody 20 years ago and did 10 years, that's not reportable here in California. And convictions only. So if there's a case with multiple charges, only the convicted charges are
I didn't know that.
are reportable.
The interesting thing is if you learn about that, you have something that be careful what you ask.
Right. And just Saji's point, a lot of clients see that there's a felony or misdemeanor conviction for something like, domestic violence with a prior felony, as an example. And they say, well, what about the prior felony? Well, you can't really show them that. Or what other charges were on there that they weren't convicted of? They always want to have more information. The HR people, right, Anita? They want to have more details. So it's not always possible. It's possible to develop that information, but it's not a compliant and best practice. So, in many other states, just to understand, non-convictions are reportable for 7 or 10 years, and convictions can be reported as far back as you can find them and verify them. So certain states, like the Florida example, you can go back and report those things a long way back. So California is probably the most restrictive, California and New York. I bring this up is just because it's new, Los Angeles Fair Chance Ordinance, their process is one of the biggest changes to background screening in terms of the process and compliance that's come out in a very, very long time. And this is the ordinance. It really applies to anyone that's in the LA area with 10 or more employees. And you can see here the flow chart. I won't get into details of it, but if you have employees or clients with employees in LA County or city, it's important that they understand this process because it impacts how they're going to actually go through the background check and onboarding, and it also impacts the assessment that's done. And what the goal here is that people that have drug-related charges where there's rehabilitation, those factors need to be considered in the decision. And so there's additional kind of assessment that needs to be documented if you're going to make the decision. And it also impacts our ability to report drug-related crimes that occurred in it for someone who has reported or been in LA County. So our adjudication process has to change. So if you have clients in LA, be aware of that, amongst other issues regarding LA employers, but super, super important to keep in mind. And I would say too, we talked about the pre-adverse adverse action process earlier. There's also this individualized assessment, talks about the nature and gravity of the jobs, the duties, and the convictions, specifically assessing the crimes they were convicted of as part of that assessment before you make the hiring decision. So an example, if the person's a driver and they had a DUI where they killed somebody, that would be directly relevant, and let's say it happened 4 years ago, directly relevant to the job. But if they're going to be doing warehouse work, non-driving, and they had a DUI that was 6.5 years ago, they're saying you need to consider the length of time, and let's just say they went to rehab or there was some story that went along with that. You got to look at all those factors before you make that decision. If you're there doing business in LA County or hiring people in LA County.
Tim, if
Yeah.
so that's a business in LA, but they reside, if they're, business, they reside outside or
Employees in
you're
LA
looking at
City.
the business location,
No, that's where the employees located,
where the employee lives.
where they work.
Where they work. Yeah.
Not where they live.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So she's saying, how do you make that assessment? We'll get to that in a second, which is more of the other complicating factors, especially with the remote workers. So if you're based in LA County, yes, it would apply to you, assuming you have a brick and mortar location.
LA City.
LA City. Yeah, and I mean, it encompasses a lot of LA. So, and you can go to the website and put in the zip code and it has the whole process that you go through. But if you have, let's say you have a business in Orange County, but you have drivers that are in LA County or they work out of a branch up there, it would apply to you as well. So, as part of the process, when I talk about electronic disclosures and authorizations, part of the process that we do is we gather that information at intake so we know how to assess those different things. So now it doesn't just say California as state of residency, it has LA and then specifically a zip code so we can determine if, where they're going to be living or working. Mike?
Is it where the corporate head office is or where the person lives?
It could be either where the work's being done or where the business is located.
So if you have someone driving into LA, even though they live here and work here?
Great area, I mean, technically.
These rules basically apply across California because the Fair Employment and Housing Act was amended to basically follow that. So it's not just LA. You should follow this throughout California.
Regardless.
Okay.
I guess maybe this is a gray area, but is there a threshold, let's say they go into LA twice a year, is that, do you follow that LA, or is there?
At the time of hiring, this assessment would be done, so it's, again, are they gonna be working in LA County or doing,
Gotcha,
or
so
there?
it's like, oh, you're going,
But again, the same process applies across California.
One thing that's popped up recently is employers are wanting to look at social media as part of their pre-employment background investigations, and that is possible.
Definitely do.
Everyone's doing it on their own,
What
just
do
not
they do?
documenting it. It is possible to do it in a compliant way. The one caveat there is that you cannot look at private accounts. You cannot ask someone for their credentials and a login. And also, there's language in the California code to talk about at this point, you cannot ask an applicant for their usernames to those accounts. So they have to be developed and then profiled and then to be public. So there's all these rules around those things, and these changes have come down because they're saying the username and handle may be one and the same, but if they are, that's part of asking for the credentials to that account, which is frowned upon. So there's a process to do that properly. And again, there's kind of a compliant way of doing that to make sure that it's not Mike Finn's crazy look-alike guy that's committed a bunch of crimes. It's truly Mike Finn based on a 3-point identification system. There is a guy.
Does that social media also kind of fall under the CRA rules.
Yes, exactly, yes. So the way in which it's pulled back and analyzed falls in those categories, and it's looking for, it's a point scoring system, and again, it's FCRA compliant. FCRA being the Fair Credit Reporting Act, that governs kind of at the federal level, all kind of background screening. We're talking about both federal and state issues that impact what we do here in California. Credit checks, thing of the past, just to point out here, if the person's not directly involved in financial transactions, cash handling, and things like that, it's pretty much frowned upon here in the state of California. Also to keep in mind, credit checks for employment purposes do not include a score. Their bankruptcies, judgments, and liens have been removed. And as of this year, you guys might have heard, medical providers are no longer allowed to report. They can report things to a collection agency, but those things are going to be removed or not reported on your credit reports anymore. So you're getting kind of a very thin view of what the overall characteristics from a financial perspective is when you run a credit check. So our practice is if a client's in a space that requires that, like financial services, or there's a requirement to do it, you can run a bankruptcy, judgments, and lien search as a standalone to uncover that information. That's a concern from a financial perspective. Okay, let's see here. So what can you search for? What should you search for? What's off limits? So we always talk about, you want to create a background screening profile that fits for the risk factors of the business, the position, and kind of the overall cost involved. There's a ton of things you can look for, but at a core level, you're looking for criminal level searches at the county, state, and probably at the federal level. And then other clients move into verifications of employment and education, depending on the level. So you're creating a package that makes sense from a risk perspective, from a cost perspective, and also a turnaround. Remember, every time you layer on another search, like a verification, you're probably going to extend your turnaround time for a background check. So, like in our agency, our turnaround time is about, what is it, 2.1 days, right?
Not much.
Across the board, right? But if you add on verifications of your prior 5 employers, you're going to see an extended turnaround time there. What's off limits? All the stuff I talked about earlier, non-convictions in California, workers' comp searches, social media on private accounts, hacking into social media accounts. There's a variety of things that shouldn't be done. Not to say that employers aren't doing them, but again, creating more risk where risk doesn't need to be created. And what's new? So this is kind of exciting. So just so you guys understand, in order for a background check to process through, so if Mike Finn says that his name is Brad Finn and gives us a different date of birth, we're taking that as word and we're going to try and verify that, but we're running a background check on somebody that doesn't exist or somebody else that maybe have the same identifiers, but it's not there. So what we're looking at now is that people are getting very smart. They use fake identifiers, or they use a sibling or a spouse to get around detection. So if you look at a government-issued ID and a real-time photo and you put that together, you can stop them from this nefarious process from the get-go, and you can create a safer background check. So technology is being used currently to kind of guide this process. And what it looks like is that you're asking for a real-time photo through an application secure technology, and then there's a comparison to a state-issued identification card before the background check can be done. Recently, just so you guys understand, we've had several situations where people have intentionally done this to get around there, and with a lot of different factors, including the randomization of social security numbers, which is happening, it's harder for us to identify people through traditional means, unlike it was in the past. So this is something that's kind of new, and we're trying to educate people about it, but it's going to be where things go, because securing the identity of the person, having the proper identifiers is crucial, especially when you have alias names, maiden names, and things like that. So super, super important. We talked about the don'ts a little bit here. Instant background checks, there's no such thing. If they're running an instant background check, someone's running an instant background check, they're hitting a set of data that's old, non-comprehensive, and not robust. If you think about it, in California, every state, every county level court has a different process and a different fee. And so in order to hit where any county where the person's lived, it's almost impossible to do it instantly. Again, it takes us 2.1 days, and we're working super hard at it. If, as an example, in Sacramento, you have to send actually a court order to the courthouse to search the documents, so there's no way an instant background check would do that. So you're missing out on a lot of things for the most part. Again, background checks without authorizations, clients do it all the time. Well, we already hired the person, we want to do a background check. Well, what do you think? I think it's a bad idea, right? if the background check comes back clean, you're fine. The problem is if something comes up, and what are you going to do about it? And now, there's a duty in California to provide a consumer copy. Well, we don't want to provide that. Okay, well then, you're going further down that road with the rest of the employees. Figure it out. Talked about it a little bit earlier, private social media accounts, bad idea. The landscape. So we talked about where people live and work and remote workers. So in today's day and age, it's important to understand that just because an employer is in California doesn't mean they're going to hire people that live and work in other areas. And being aware of this and the rules. So you're going to need a Neosha or Anita to go through and help you to figure out what that looks like. Because although you're based here, people are hiring folks all over the place, right? And what those rules are and what that looks like, and making sure that you're doing it compliantly. Again, if you're compliant in California, for the most part, you're going to be good in other places, but you need to be aware of those rules and what that process looks like as you work through it. In California, you guys might have heard about the Hammer case, right, Ron? You know the Hammer case at Riverside? So there was a case filed on Riverside that had to do with the privatization of dates of birth and driver's license numbers on criminal records because the plaintiff's bar decided that criminals should have, this was a breach of everyone's privacy to have this information on these dockets because it could be stolen and used for identity theft. The Riverside courts agreed with the plaintiff's counsel and they won. It was held on appeal. And so every court in California has since redacted driver's licenses and full dates of birth. So now we're fighting this battle, which is in order to provide an accurate background check with verified identifiers, which is name and date of birth, but we don't have the full name and date of birth. So how do we get to it, right? So it's creating a lot of problems in terms of time, cost. Again, Sacramento could take a month or more to get back a search on a name and date of birth because it must be done manually. LA County, if there's a hit on a common name, it could be a week. There's all these things that come up. And so tell your clients to tell them how it's impacting their business because most of the time it's impacting those people without criminal records. It's the clears that are getting held up because 90% of the time that's how it's happening. And so it's creating a lot of problems here. And again, that's another reason why an instant background check, whether you're an attorney or an HR person, anytime you're instantly clicking the button, you're not getting the full picture in California because nobody can unless you have the right technology and tools. So look it up. It's interesting. Again, social media searches are becoming the norm. I would encourage people to do them compliantly if you want to use them or you want to be educated on what you can use and what you can't use. Do it in a compliant way and do it across the board. A lot of people want to be aware of these things and there's a way to do it. And again, the compliance challenges, I would say for the most part, if you're doing business in California, you're fine. If you're moving into New York, you need to get with an HR consultant and an attorney. There's some very specific rules in New York that impact that, and there are many other states that are following that route. And so be aware of those state-specific laws as you kind of hire those remote folks. For us, so this is super complicated, and you might say, well, how do you manage all this if you don't have an HR consultant? So we offer like what we call the CRA help desk for our clients. They can go through it, and it's a free resource that's updated by law firms, and they can go through and look at all these different rules. And do some analysis. There's forums. There's also ways to look at different state rules, 7-year states, and everything like that. And then we also, and again, it talks about ban the box and all the different kind of things that apply. So you can program your state and what's going on, and it kind of gives you kind of some basic guidelines of what that is. And then obviously, we also have a podcast that's out there called Background Screening System Tech, and helps our clients to kind of stay apprised of these things that I'm talking about with you today. So thanks so much. I'm happy to answer any questions.